In 1985, Steve Jobs sat alone in an office that no longer felt like his. The company he had built from nothing, the company he had poured his identity into, had just fired him. He was 30 years old, and for the first time in his life, Steve Jobs didn't know who he was anymore. Not a visionary, not a leader, not the future of technology. Just a man watching the world move on without him. This was the moment that changed everything. Steve Jobs co-founded Apple in 1976 in a small garage with his friend Steve Wozniak. They weren't trying to build a company. They were trying to build a revolution. At a time when computers were cold, complex machines meant for corporations, Jobs believed something radical, that technology should feel personal, beautiful, simple, human. The Apple II became one of the first mass-market personal computers. Success came fast, too fast. By his mid-20s, Jobs was already famous. By his late 20s, he was being called a genius. But behind the image was something else. Jobs was intense, demanding, obsessively perfectionistic. He didn't just want great products. He wanted control, and that would become his greatest weakness. In 1983, Jobs made a decision that would quietly shape his downfall. He hired John Sculley as Apple's CEO. Sculley was experienced, polished, corporate. Jobs thought he could learn from him, but the two men saw the world differently. Jobs cared about vision. Sculley cared about structure. Jobs pushed relentlessly. Sculley tried to slow things down. Meetings turned tense. Decisions turned political. And slowly, without realizing it, Jobs began to lose allies. Board members started to question him. Employees felt burned out. His intensity stopped looking like passion and started looking like chaos. Jobs could feel it, but instead of adjusting, he pushed harder. Then came the meeting, a closed room, a quiet decision. The board stripped Steve Jobs of his managerial power. He wasn't fired outright, but he was sidelined. The company he created no longer trusted him to lead it. To the outside world, it looked like a business move. To Jobs, it felt like exile. He later said this moment was devastating. Apple wasn't just his job, it was his identity. And overnight, it was gone. For months, Jobs wandered. He felt publicly humiliated, privately ashamed. He questioned everything. Was he actually talented, or had he just been lucky once? Eventually, Jobs did something unexpected. He started over. He founded a new company called Next. It wasn't a massive success. In fact, most people ignored it. But something important happened during those years. Jobs slowed down. He learned patience. He learned restraint. Around the same time, he invested in a small animation studio called Pixar. It struggled for years, almost collapsed more than once. But Jobs stayed, not because of ego, but because he believed in the process. For the first time, Steve Jobs wasn't chasing validation. He was learning. Years later, Jobs reflected on being fired from Apple, and he said something unexpected. He said it was the best thing that ever happened to him, because the weight of being successful was replaced by the freedom of being curious again. He stopped trying to prove himself and started trying to understand himself. That shift changed everything. Steve Jobs would eventually return to Apple, older, calmer, clearer, and this time, he didn't lead from fear. He led from clarity. The moment Steve Jobs lost everything didn't break him. It stripped him. And in that silence, he found what truly mattered. Sometimes the moment that feels like the end of your story is the moment that finally makes you who you're meant to be. That was the moment that made Steve Jobs.